Good afternoon and welcome to this RTS Early Evening Events program. You might have noticed that it's not the early evening. We're continuing as a lunchtime online Zoom session. I welcome all of you to this session. This one's about what does the road to recovery look like after COVID-19? The economic implications for the big players in the years ahead. This is obviously a big topic. We are in, I think we've used the word unprecedented times a lot, but I think that's certainly where we are, and we thought this would be a good moment to look at it. I'm Kate Bulkley. I'm a media commentator. I'm going to chair this session today. I have a very good panel that I'm going to introduce in a second. I think you can see them on your screens. The first thing I'd like to say is I've been told by a message that we have over 300 people signed on to listen to this. So thank you very much for joining this RTS online Zoom session. This is going to be a panel discussion. It's going to be for an hour. We have 2 breaks for audience questions. The idea being that you can think of your questions, put them in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll have 2 moments in the discussion where we will bring you in. These will be moderated by my producers, and they'll shoot the ones at me so I can actually just repeat them. So you're actually not going to be in vision. You're just going to be putting your questions in the Q&A box. The other thing I should say is that for those who have not been spending their working days on Zoom, we're also going to be sharing slides. So at some point you'll see some slides come up on your screen, and we're also going to do some polling. If you haven't done polls before, when the poll comes up, choose your, click the choices you want, and then you must press submit. If you do not press submit, it's not going to work. So please do that. This session is also going to be recorded, so you can view it later. So let me now introduce our panel, and then we'll get going. We have Lindsay Clay. She's the CEO of ThinkBox, the marketing body for the UK commercial TV sector, and you probably know which one she is. She's got the ThinkBox logo behind her. We've got Sean McGuire. He's Managing Director of Strategy Advisors Oliver & Olbaum. He's got the marvelous looking bookcase behind him. Hello, Sean. We have Damien Green, MP. He's a member of the DCMS Select Committee, and which is currently looking at the future of PSB. Thank you very much, Damien, for being with us. And last but not least, we have Claire Enders. She is the founder of consultancy Enders Analysis. Claire, we thought we'd start with you. You've done a lot of work on what's been going on with viewing, with trends. Could you just start us off with looking at TV, at VOD, at subscription VOD and advertising? What has been the impact of COVID-19?
Okay, so Jonathan, could you put up the first slide? So just before I start, Kate, I think
Yes.
you receive our research for free. I think my company is a research company. Thank you very much. We don't do any consultancy at the moment except for being expert witnesses for the IRS in their case against Facebook.
I apologize.
Don't worry. Anyway, so as you can see on this slide, there has been an extraordinary renewal in the BBC's position as the UK's authority for news, but that impact on consumption of news has been broad across all the PSBs, and they have taken on a unique role in society with their level of news coverage, information, and education. But the BBC has played the central role in relaying and unpicking events for the population. So peak audiences have exceeded 9 million for News at 6. And that is before factoring in additional iPlayer viewing. So these are remarkable and very healthy times. Could you change the slide? So commercial viewing has been also very healthy. So there's been an average of around 25% increase in many segments. And sports viewing, of course, has plummeted and suffered huge losses, but we'll see what happens once the PL restarts. Could you change the slide, please? Despite these extraordinarily healthy viewing increases, which reverse a steady pattern of audience declines spanning the last decade, a pincer movement of Netflix and YouTube principally, but obviously more recently of Disney Plus. But absolute viewing has been up. but unfortunately, TV will face its largest quarterly decline ever. And as a result, we have, as people who have been watching this market since the mid-'80s, we've never clocked a quarter like the one that we will have now. There has never been a quarter in which the year-on-year decline was more than 20%. However, with GDP expected to go down in this quarter by around 25%, we're expecting the market to be down by around 50% for this quarter. It could be 45 to 50%, but it's nothing short of catastrophic. And the market, of course, could be down by 30 to 50% this year if things don't improve pretty soon. And may I just point out that we have got today around 12 million people who are either on furlough or on unemployment. So we have not seen the impact of unemployment on our economy or indeed on advertising. We have yet to wait that. And of course, there's hard Brexit to come in January 2021. Could you move to the next slide? Thanks. So actually, we've also seen a remarkable increase, about 100% in unmatched viewing, I believe. And there have been many strands in this. We saw in the results of Netflix and Google that Netflix revenue in Q1 2020 was up 28%. YouTube revenue globally was up 33%. We have seen certainly matching elements of increased consumption. Disney Plus has gotten off to a roaring start. We clocked them at over 2 million subs today on the basis of the amount of consumption that is going on. And of course, then there's been a remarkable uplift in gaming. Again, 57% increase in the time spent on game consoles versus weeks prior to lockdown. And interestingly, time among girls aged 4 to 15 has actually doubled. So games are actually also one of the few things propping up the ad market. So we salute those who are continuing to engage in this very long-term drift towards virtualization of consumption, and of course the fundamental shift to online consumption of content. Thank you very much.
That's great, Claire. Thank you. So with that sort of perspective, Sean, can I bring you in here? You know, and Claire may have some other additional views, but how do you see the TV viewing developing over the medium and long term? I mean, we've seen this huge, you know, we've got this incredible increase in viewing, we've got a collapse in advertising. What's the next phase in your mind?
So I think the best way to think about it is you need to split it into 3 different effects. So you've got the immediate impact, which is what we're currently living through, where economic activity has basically stopped and people are doing different things, advertisers are not advertising. There's a whole, you know, we're in the eye of the hurricane. So, but even once we're through that immediate thing, I think we're going to come into 2 very serious impacts. Firstly, there's going to be a very big cyclical impact. We've never seen a downturn this sharp or this deep. And even if you believe the OBR's forecast for GDP recovery next year, there's going to be a huge lag on employment. There's going to be a huge lag on consumer spending. There's going to be a huge lag on corporate profitability. And that's what drives the media market in terms of pay subscriptions or TV advertising. So it's going to take us a long time to get out of that. And then even on top of the cyclical effects, I think, as Claire mentioned, this could catalyze some fairly profound structural change in that, you know, not all the TV advertising money might come back. It might go somewhere else. It might just not come back at all. We're running a real-time experiment where consumers are learning to live without Sky Sports. And when they come back, they might think that £100 plus a month is pretty steep, particularly in the strained economic times. But at the same time, we're running again an experiment in real time where people are taking out more and more SVOD and OTT subscriptions. So we think even by early April, in the time between lockdown and early April, there were 4.6 million new SVOD subscriptions in the UK. And so that the change, the move from linear to on demand is definitely being accelerated. So it's not all catastrophic. There are some winners out of this, but the next 2 years will see some very profound impact.
So let's talk about what the recovery curve might look like. And we're getting ready to do our first.
Excuse me.
Yes, go ahead, Claire.
I think your question was also about where TV viewing is going to go. I'm sure that we are not the only people who see that there's going to be a continued and sustained element of video usage, which is simply not going to disappear. People's lives will have changed. You know, if you expect only maybe 25% of pubs to reopen, you're looking at a fundamental change. And I prefer to use the word paradigm shift rather than unprecedented, because this is truly a paradigm shift in our economy and in behavior. So we do expect PSB viewing, BBC viewing to continue to remain very, very strong. So, and Netflix and Disney Plus and YouTube, and I'm with Sean 100%. We've seen extraordinary impact, positive impact on SVOD subscriptions of this across the world.
So if that's the case, as you say, viewing is going to continue, but we still got this recovery problem in terms of what the recovery curve looks like. So if I could ask you to maybe, everybody can comment on that. What do you think the recovery curve is going to look like? And I'll just set that up by saying the chancellor this week is quoted as saying he is not counting on a V-shaped recovery that many have been hoped for. It's not obvious, he says, that there will be an immediate bounce back. The jury is still out on the degree of long-term scarring. So we've already talked about that, but how is that going to impact the recovery?
So Kate, I'm so sorry, you're using the wrong word. We're not in any, and I think Sean was trying to hammer this through, we are not going to be in recovery in that word applying to our situation until well into the middle of 2021. That is when that word will start to apply to conditions. What you're asking me is a different question, which is how bad can it get? And I think Sean has pointed out, it can get a lot worse than it already is. And that will happen when the furlough scheme ends in October, when we confront hard Brexit, if that is the government's will. Which as you know, was always expected to cost around 3 million or 4 million jobs anyway. We'll have all the disruption to the NHS. Things are going to get an awful lot worse before we can start using that word. When we do use that word in the middle of 2021, and I'm sure Sean will concur, the impact on the fabric. I mean, if we're looking at a 25% drop in GDP in a single quarter, which the word unprecedented and paradigm shift is completely appropriate for, then what are we going to be seeing in the further quarters of this year and onwards? We might continue to be in what I would call a Great Depression. So it's really modeling a Great Depression. That would lead one to believe that advertising income will not recover its level in 2020 until 2025.
Okay, so why don't we put up that first poll now? And I regret to say that it does say recovery, but as you see the poll, everyone, let's take the poll if you see it. Jonathan, can you put it up? Thank you very much. What does the TV advertising recovery curve look like? Does it look like a U, a V, a W, or an L, or something else? So if you could vote and then do press submit after you vote. And Damien, can I just bring you in here? So it looks pretty dire for the economy, and as we've been hearing from Claire and Sean, what is that? This is going to have a big impact, obviously, on the television market. What are you all thinking about in government about this? What's the appetite for some kind of help or?
I think, I mean, to start with the macro point, that this week's analysis, and really it is changing week by week. You're right, absolutely, we've moved on from any idea of a V-shaped recovery. I think the Nike swish is now being quoted as a sort of steady but quite gradual recovery. And it is recovering. Yeah, where we hit bottom is an interesting point, and everyone who's mentioned, Sean and Claire, are right that the biggest effects on the economy more widely will come when things like the furlough scheme ends. You know, as we speak, the British state is paying the wages of a third of the people in this country. You cannot carry on like that.
Yeah.
So the autumn and winter will be unbelievably rough. But in terms of what help might come, to answer the specific question, I'll be brutally honest. If every government minister is now facing the entire country wanting bailouts, and the TV industry is not high on the list of those who tug the heartstrings. Even just within the DCMS sector, the tourism industry is flat on its back. Other bits of the creative industries, theatres and things like that, are absolutely flat on their back. And a lot of these are very, very small institutions that will just disappear. And I think, if I were the minister, I would be taking the calculation that, well, we know the BBC's not going to disappear because it's getting license fee income. ITV is big enough to look after itself. Channel 4 is more vulnerable, but even Channel 4 is not like, the South Bank or any of the provincial theatres or so on. So I don't think, I think the support for advertising will continue because there's a budget for that, but I don't think there'll be another pot of money put in to broadcasters of any kind. And one other point I'll make while I'm on, as it were, is I thought Sean's point was really interesting about, will people, having not had live sport with an expensive subscription for a long time, will they just say, okay, I can live without this in my life? I think that's a really interesting unknown, because in as much as we have a historic precedent, is what happened after World War II, where pre-TV advertising and things like that, but nevertheless, what happened in the late 1940s was a fantastic rush back to sport in particular. That football and cricket and everything had bigger audiences then, as a sign of people getting back to normal. It's what they seized. Now, if that happens again, then actually they will rush back and want nothing more than their Sky Sport or BT Sport subscription, as well as before going to live games. So if that happens, then I think Sean might be being too pessimistic there.
So Lindsay, go ahead.
Can I point out that I'm sure Damien is right, because we've seen massive enthusiasm in Germany, and even our country has been swept with enthusiasm for the Bundesliga. So I'm with you 100%, Damien. However, I think the point Sean is making is one that looks to the future of the end of the furlough scheme. You can possibly pay this on £2,500 a month, but when you're down to 700, and there are millions and millions of people affected, I don't think there's any doubt at all that we could see a massive drop in pay TV subscriptions.
Yeah. So Lindsay, just quickly, what do you think the shape of the recovery might look like from your perspective at ThinkBox?
Well,
are you pessimistic? Are you more towards the swoosh? And then we're going to put the poll up, by the way. But you say
I am both a professional and a personal optimist. So I think it will be a likely swoosh in some kind of shape or form. I'm hoping for a slightly steeper swoosh than is actually on it. But yes, I'm most definitely an optimist on these things. So I know that what we can't control is what happens with the overall economy, but I think we've got plenty to be positive about. That TV advertising will get more than its fair share of the advertising money available. There's all sorts of reasons not to be catastrophists on that front. So, just nothing else does what TV advertising does. It is irreplaceable. You can't get the reach at that number of eyeballs. You haven't got that trust. And it's absolutely fundamental to business success. It drives 71% of the profit of all advertising generated profit. But also looking at some of the pointers for the future. We talked about structural changes happening in TV, and yes, some of those are very positive. So there is a redistribution of viewing going on, isn't there, between linear and on demand as we watch more on demand. But advertising is also being transformed as well. And the broadcasters are investing very heavily in broadcaster video on demand and in Sky AdSmart and these sorts of things. And interestingly, if you look at the decline in linear TV revenue, the decline in BVOD revenue is much less steep. So even over the last couple of months, advertisers have sustained their investment in BVOD more than they have in linear TV, and that is very much, a really important part of the future.
It's important, but of course that's a minor part of where they make most of their money. That's the problem. It's not caught up yet.
It is at the moment, but that is growing all the time. So it's a really healthy part of TV's growth.
So let's see the results of the poll. Jonathan, if you could put that up. So it looks like, let's see, W wins. So that sounds like maybe they're taking into account your idea about hard Brexit and maybe reinfection and all those things we talked about, Claire, yes? Next, it's close, except for V. V clearly did not win. Right, so Sean, let's dig a little deeper now and talk about the industry and the round. Returning to a new normal, obviously when that happens, and Claire's already made it clear that, and you also, it's probably not gonna happen until next year. How do we get from here to there? And what does that look like? And what do we need to do to make sure that we don't lose the broadcasting business or the good bits of the PSB system that we have? What kind of roadmap do we need to be thinking about?
Well, I think it extends further than that, because I think at some point you're already beginning to see it. At some point, late midsummer, early autumn, we're gonna have no content because nothing's being made right now. So so the fall schedules, which have always driven demand, if you like, and being sold around the world, are going to be a bit thin, because there are nowhere around the world are there any serious productions being made. So people are using what they've got, but at some point we're going to be living on a diet of repeats and reruns. So I think that is one of the problems that the sector's going to have to overcome.
That will slow it down, because how many more lockdown videos are you going to watch? Yes, Claire.
So I think also a key point in terms of the longer term picture of our industry is that this favors vertically integrated producers. So ITV and the BBC will be quicker off the ground. Netflix has a stranglehold on premium facilities. Sky has been building its own facilities. I think whether it's in the USA or here, vertical integration and scale will come to the fore. And let's face it, we just have to recognize that this paradigm shift lays bare what has always been true, which is public service broadcasting cannot exist anywhere in the world without a specific intervention of a license fee and of a system that is regulated for public goals, including culture. So this whole experience is one in which I'm afraid the big will only get bigger. And Sean has pointed out, massive increase in OTT. So we're going to see Netflix and Disney Plus. Also, Disney is vertically integrated. They have a lot of other problems, but Disney Plus is one of the great successes of our modern age, probably the most successful OTT launch in the UK. So that, I think, is going to also be an extraordinarily important feature, is just that the businesses that will be stronger in 2021 and in 2022 will all be vertically integrated, reversing, 30 years of thinking in the UK around the existence of a very, very, very diverse 1,000+ supplier base in terms of independent production. That is going to have to be rethought. And that is true, even though the production companies have now started to benefit from the furlough scheme. But as Sean says, the issues, and then of course so in any case, so I think that's a fundamental point. We're simply going to get bigger, yeah. and the attraction of global models will be that they have simply got so much more revenue and money to bring to bear on these problems.
So Damien, when you look at this, yes, I mean, please respond, because basically what Claire is saying is, without intervention, with, out thinking about what the public good is of public service broadcasting, it's not going to exist, or certainly not going to exist in the shape we have it now.
Well, I think that's right. And I think this crisis does bring into sharp focus one of the great paradoxes that underpins the whole of British broadcasting, which is that the license fee system doesn't work in theory, but does work in practice. And success, and that's been true for the last couple of charter renewals. And what we're learning literally today and for the last 2 months is that it will still happen now. And I think it's ever more important if the prognostications of doom are right, and anyone who voted that there's going to be an L-shaped recovery, I'd hope, I take counselling, because if that's true, then we're all stuffed. And certainly everyone in the broadcasting industry is stuffed. So that's a really gloomy prognostication. But what it seems to me is that in answering as it were, your original question to me, which is, what can the government do to help? Actually, it's two things. First of all, allow the BBC to continue to collect a compulsory license fee, and through regulation, mandate the BBC to have diverse suppliers so that the independent sector can survive, or a lot of it can survive over the next couple of years. A combination of those two things will effectively act as the kind of public subsidy that a lot of other industries are going to get one way or another. And since we already have an existing mechanism to do that, which is essentially a poll tax that the vast majority of people are quite happy to pay, it's a brilliant trick to pull off, but we pull it off in this country, that maintaining that over the next couple of years is going to be completely essential to the survival of the whole industry.
But there is already pressure on that system, as both Claire and Sean can tell you. I mean, the over 75 license fee. What do they do about news? Do they cut? I mean, they're looking to cut. So the BBC can't be the be-all and end-all of the recovery. Claire?
Well, I mean, but it can be what it has always been, which is the backbone of our system. So the BBC has always been the core training ground, also the place of training in all the regions and so on. That absolutely, it can persist. So the focus absolutely must be, everybody's minds must be focused on the 22 to 27 settlement, which the next DG and the next chairperson will be responsible for pulling off. And that is going to set the stage for all the recovery that can trickle down. And exactly to Damien's point, in terms of independent production, which is the hardest hit part. But the other point I just think that you need to think about, Kate, and all the RTS needs to think about, is the asymmetry between the UK and the USA, and the asymmetry between the UK and Europe. All the European public service broadcasters are being supported in ways that are incomparably greater. All the independent production companies are getting 100% grants and things of that nature, in Germany in particular. So we're going to see all of their creative industries survive, and maybe only 50% of the shape, I'm including theaters, museums, and all that. But, it's extraordinary that our fiscal envelope does not seem to have any material impact at all. And by comparison, what's going on in Germany and France and Italy, where literally companies, utilities are being paid 100% by the state, is another asymmetry. And of course, in the US, there's been one of the biggest creative stimuli of all time, beyond what was spent in World War II in its entirety in 3 months. That is going to keep Hollywood going. So we're in a completely different environment. The UK is pitifully and badly afflicted, and it's comparatively on its stomach, actually.
So, Damien, is the political appetite just not there to support the creative industries?
I don't quite agree with that, because with what Claire just said, in that a lot of companies within the creative sector will be benefiting from what is a completely unprecedented support for industry more widely. So, and it is absolutely essential and extraordinarily generous. That the government's debt ratio is going to go up from having spent a decade, the austerity decade, got the rate down from 90% to 80%. We will be minimally up at 150% by this time next year. There's a lot of money being pumped around to save a lot of jobs and keep things going. And it may well be, I do take the point that some of it has not been, or less of it has been ring-fenced for the creative sector more widely than it has been in other countries. And the DCMS Select Committee is sort of jabbing away at the government about this, and we will continue to do so, because obviously we recognise the importance of these industries. So there may be more to come, but I think it will be pretty much in the form of supporting smaller companies, smaller suppliers, smaller outfits than if you like the big players.
Okay, let me just do a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. Thank you, audience, for your questions. We have a sports question. I think it's off of Sean's comment, so maybe Sean can answer this one. As sports packages will be reviewed, bearing in mind they are now virtually irrevocable, will this signal a new paradigm where the broadcasters are sidelined and clubs, leagues, and federations will have a direct relationship with consumers? I.e., will that disintermediate people like Sky and things like that? What's your response to that, Sean?
I think sport will remain vitally important to pay TV operators. I think they will look very hard at what they spend on those rights, and I think some sports, particularly the smaller ones, who've already had to deal with rights increases that were at best flat, might be better off going direct. But is the Premier League likely to do that? No.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, one more. It says here, what will be the impact on regional industry development? I don't know who wants to tackle that one. Claire.
Well, there has been the very positive move of Channel 4, to set up that. And I think that ultimately public service broadcasting will be tasked with regional training. And so that will be, in fact, the greater purpose of public service broadcasting will not only be to reflect the fabric of our country as it really is, but also to provide opportunities for renewal. To Damien's point, very much. I just want to point out, of course, that the fiscal measures of the government are nowhere near those of Germany or Italy or France or the USA. I mean, they may be unprecedented or paradigm shifts, but remember, what is really going on is an inadequate. I mean, obviously we have a very poor fiscal envelope. We're bankrupt. So anyway, so PSB is going to be our only source of future a renewal in the granular base, and of course universities, another sector we haven't mentioned, but very, very hard hit, also requiring bailout at this time, and how that all feeds in. Well, we spent 25 years having a creative economy that grew at 10% a year. So that was the bedrock also of the broadcasting system and so on. So that must be, and I'm very glad to hear from Damien that the DCMS is going to look at that fabric of production companies and its extraordinary disappearance.
The thing is, the regional initiatives might be cut if the broadcasters have to cut their budgets. I don't know if you've thought about that, Damien, because that's going to hit the regions, which is a smaller part. And related to that, there's another question that's sort of related. It says, what about freelancers or young people who are suffering now and considering leaving the industry? Those are smaller players who are going to get hit.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones who most deserve. So I need to say at this point, from what Claire's just said, I'm not speaking on behalf of DCMS. I don't know what DCMS is going to do. I can talk about what the DCMS committee, which supervises, as it will, scrutinises rather than DCMS, and also to say that we're bankrupt and compared to Italy is just bizarre economic analysis. We are not. We do have the fiscal firepower that you should have after a decade of austerity, and Italy frankly doesn't. But the regional point is really interesting, and it seems to me that one of the cute things that the new director of the BBC should do would be to build on the move to Salford and so on, and make it part of the BBC's mission to spread creative activity as much around the country as possible, because A, that will be essential economically, it will be essential culturally, and it will be something that in this country only the BBC has got the firepower to do. So it could be something that uniquely would help a lot of, precisely the point you make, freelancers, small, fragile outfits who are going to be more fragile than ever before over the next couple of years. Actually, that use of the license fee money would preserve a sort of production base and a creative base in many places around the UK, and that will be hugely important.
Yeah, I take your point, but Channel 4 doesn't get any license fee money, and yet they support a lot of independent production companies and a lot of regionalization. As you know, they've opened up regional hubs. They have a whole regional remit. They are very exposed in this crisis. I think, Lindsay, what is it, 83%, I think, of Channel 4's revenue is advertising. So it's, I mean, they are very exposed.
Hugely dependent on advertising revenue, more exposed than anyone else.
So, they need to support, unless you start giving them maybe different quotas, or the government says, maybe we do different things. Claire.
I think definitely that is going to be the right response, because definitely Channel 4 is going to have a supply base that's going to take some time. Hopefully 50% survives, hopefully, but then it will take some time to recover it. Obviously, they don't have access to the actual studio facilities that they're going to need to make things. I mean, that said, there is going to be quite a lot of innovation. There's an awful lot of home food programs that are being made. But I do think that, but just to go back to the bigger macro point, no, actually the UK is on its own in the world. Italy is basically part of an EU bloc, which is backed by Germany, and the US and China are superpowers, and everybody, I mean, obviously, the world is very complex, but the UK does not have the backup that Italy has today. No, one can't say that. But I agree that in a comparison of bankrupts, we can hardly say that we're the most bankrupt, because there's certainly Argentina and many other countries. So, but the world global crisis, I think, is one that is going to affect the advertising phenomenon as a whole and consumption phenomenon as a whole. So, that is inevitable, that the whole world will suffer from this change. Although in European terms, the UK will suffer the most impact in terms of advertising and also in terms of business destruction, and that is already visible from our review of the French, German, and Spanish markets.
So it's interesting. Thank you, Claire. What's interesting about this is, Damien, at one point you said, ITV is big enough to take care of itself. But is it really? I mean, we've got an interesting fabric here. We've talked about Channel 4 being uniquely vulnerable because of its dependence on advertising. So there's one bit. And they don't take any license fees. So what are the mechanisms maybe government or the DCMS or Ofcom or somebody could be thinking about, maybe in terms of, I don't know, changing quotas, due prominence, what kind of levers can you pull? And then on the ITV bit, yes, they're privately owned, but they're still a standalone company. Channel 5, of course, is completely different. It's part of a huge conglomerate. It's owned by Viacom CBS. So they've got a buffer. So how do you see, let me ask Damien first and then I'll come to Claire. Damien, how do you see those different entities? Or are you willing to just say, well, maybe we can let some of them fail?
I hope not. I mean, each of them has something distinctive and valuable to contribute to the broadcasting landscape, obviously. I mean, my slightly thorough remark about ITV was that, of course, ITV pays dividends and things like that, so it has that kind. It could not do that, and clearly that would not be cheerful for the shareholders. But there's that. Channel 4 doesn't even have that kind of buffer. I was making the point that there's a hierarchy of fragility, and I take Lindsay's point that Channel 4 is probably the most fragile of the public service broadcasters. I mean, governments can do various things, or Ofcom could do various things. You could allow more advertising time when we're out of this. But I mean, the other thing you could do would probably be less palatable to everyone listening to this panel, because it might involve things like relaxing independent quotas and things like that, and allowing them to make more programs in-house to cut costs. So there are good and bad ways you can try and ease the pain for the non-BBC public service broadcasters.
I think one of the other, if you don't mind me stepping in, the other things that would help is concentrating on levelling the playing field between the UK broadcasters and their significant competitors, who nowadays are the big global tech platforms. So, you know, as you know, TV is a highly regulated industry, and what seems to happen is it attracts ever more regulation, you know, tying their hands further and further behind their back. Meanwhile, you know, regulation of the tech giants, of their advertising, of their practices, it seems to fall into the too difficult box. So my plea would be not to take our eye off the ball on, you know, some of the good work that's going on, scrutinising their, you know, the online advertising review.
Kate, I just want to make the point that I'm quite sure that Ofcom will be focusing on the survival of every part of the industry. When you're talking about ITV, ITV can do a rights issue. They did a rights issue in 2009. Channel 4, it may be necessary in due course for Channel 4 to lose its sales operation or for it to merge with Channel 5. It may be necessary for ITV to be part of a global conglomerate in due course. You know, that argument was certainly to the fore in 2010. You know, all of these things will happen as they're going to happen. But this paradigm shift may be responded to correctly, in my view, by Ofcom by completely relaxing any form of onerous quota that simply, as Sean has said, cannot be realized. I mean, if the independent producers simply can't get space or studios or restart, then you can't force Channel 4 to create stuff out of thin air. What's going to happen is it will have the freedom to acquire a lot more material from US producers. I mean, a lot more library material. That's what has happened. That's what happened in 2009. Huge amounts of stuff was put on that was acquired, and everybody survived. So, you know, I'm sure that is going to be the right response. And I'm with Damien that the broadcasters are not my first concern at all. It's the independent production sector by a very long way, and of course the training schemes, and the fact that this was a major employer of freelance workers, and it was a gig economy bar none. So I'm much more concerned about those aspects than I am about the survival of the broadcasters, because I'm absolutely certain they will all survive in one way, shape, or form.
Okay, let's run the poll, and then we can talk a little bit more about this. This second poll is going to come up now for our audience. And this one is about, based on what you've heard so far, who will be the biggest winner over the next 5 years? And I think you have a lot of choices: BBC, ITV, C4, Netflix, Sky, Disney, there they are. And also there's a second bit to this: who's the biggest loser? You need to pick both, and then you need to scroll down and press submit to our audience. Thank you. Okay, we'll wait to see how long that takes to happen. When we talked a little bit about winners and losers, and you know, the structural changes and the funding models that perhaps have to change. Damien, do you have any other things that you think would help safeguard plurality, that would help safeguard news? You know, I mean, these are important poll stars for this the PSB system. Is there anything that you are going to talk about in your DCMS role, your committee?
Well, we haven't, for obvious reasons. We've ended up, we were supposed to be doing PSB as our first inquiry, and it's been overtaken by COVID, and we'll take up the reins again on that in June. I think in terms of news specifically, I mean, we're not allowed to answer that poll, but in news specifically, obviously, the argument is the BBC, though I keep being reminded by Channel 4 that they now get voted on all the polls as the most trusted news provider in the country. But broadly speaking, traditional mainstream media, if you want to put it like that, come into their own. People do trust them more, even in the current era. And the fact that the public is now getting more savvy about, if you like, structured disinformation, which is a significant part of the online experience these days, in the long run, I suspect will help trusted broadcasters. The overall point I wanted to make was that the best way, probably long term, to preserve something like the current structure of our public service broadcasters, both BBC and commercial, is a completely new Broadcasting Act. I'm using the term Broadcasting Act because that's what we've used in the past, but we probably would call it something else looking to the future. But an act that was, what, 2003 was the last act?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, the backdrop to that was very much, how do you stop the BBC becoming all-embracing? In a world of
Yeah.
Google and Netflix and all the others, then that's just a laughable backdrop.
Things have moved on.
Or legislation. And so I take the point that almost more urgent than thinking, what do you do with the BBC? Do you give them another 10 years on the same system or not? Is how do we organize a regulatory structure that allows not just PSB to continue, but also competition within PSB with different income streams? That's more difficult than it was in 2003. It felt very difficult then. But if we can't do that, then we lose something very valuable for the whole culture.
Yeah. So, Lindsay, can I ask you, Damien mentioned something about maybe increasing advertising time as a possible lever that could be pulled. What would that do to the market, the overall advertising market? I mean, would that be a good thing to have more ad time? Would it change the value of advertising?
Well, the increasing minutage, if that's what you're talking about, particularly at the moment, would be hugely problematic, because the broadcasters have to fill every ad slot available. They would be interested in increasing minutage in peak, for instance. So I think maybe relaxing some of the rules. At the moment, it's a very fixed system. So if you increase in peak, you've got to decrease elsewhere. And there's currently a discrepancy because the amount of minutage allowed for the PSB commercial broadcast is very different from the non-PSBs. So I think possibly relaxing some of those rules and allowing the commercial PSB to increase their minutage a bit would be popular with them, and so that is definitely one possibility. But I think increasing ad minutage across the board, not necessarily, because it would just drive the average price down.
Right. I hear that the poll we've got a result. So 75% answered. So if Jonathan or someone could put the poll up, the poll results. Looks like there's a clear winner. Yes, Netflix is going to survive as the biggest winner over the next 5 years. And look who, Channel 4 doesn't even, let's see, biggest loser. Can we go down to the next bit? I'm not quite sure how to get to the next, I can't see the next bit. So looks like, oh, there it is, Channel 4. So Channel 4, 68% says they will be the biggest loser by far. Heavens. All right. Any comment on that from our panelists?
I think, just as a bit of context setting, I think Netflix do a brilliant job at managing their marketing, and we all fall for it. The reality that is going to impact on them, though, is of course a lot of the content providers, including the broadcasters, are going to start withdrawing the content that Netflix is so dependent on, from their platform, because they're all setting up, their own on-demand platforms. And if you look at what are the most viewed programs on Netflix, they are ex-broadcaster programs like Friends, like The Big Bang Theory. It's not their huge originals. So that is a big problem for them coming down the pipe, which is your broadcasters withdrawing their.
Well, yeah, I take your point, but they're also throwing money at their own.
Yeah. Can I intervene there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Netflix is, as you saw in their first results, they have in fact systematically survived the withdrawal of Disney licenses, Time Warner licenses, the BBC's licenses, and Uncle Tom Copley's licenses. So I don't buy that argument at all. And if you saw the increase in the last 2 quarters where they did not have that material, you would be saying to yourself, God, they really have found the magic sauce. And what that magic sauce is spending $50 billion on content in the last 8 years. And yes, they've had a lot of failures, but overall, and also They are acquiring material. Currently, the BBC is in discussion with them about relicensing. They're acquiring material from all over the world, and they're first out the blocks to acquire stuff. They are going to be the company that has the biggest pipeline, and they've already said we're completely sorted for 2021, and we're halfway through we're halfway through 2021 already in terms of all of the stuff. And they, of course, are also vertically integrated in America. So no, I completely accept that. But, honestly, if they weren't, I think that the really interesting thing is why they're not doing better. So the BBC in total accounts for around 31% of all video usage.
Mhm.
Even though it spends a fraction of what Netflix spends, and Netflix is spending, as I said, telephone numbers year in, year out, 50 billion, in order to derive only 9% of all video time that people spend in the UK. So I think actually, I'm with Lindsay in saying what is remarkable is with very, very small resources, our broadcasters cannot waste a penny, and they certainly deliver a huge bang for buck by comparison with Netflix if you scale the cost of Netflix to what it's actually achieving in the UK.
Yeah. So Sean, can I come to you now? We're going to move sort of into our final bit, which is sort of what happens next. One of the things we talked about, you telling us a little bit about, is what structural changes you think are needed. Is all of this implying more consolidation? Is it more collaborations or partnerships? I mean, Claire's already talked about, ITV doing a rights deal. I mean, are we going to see mergers? I mean, what is your view on what needs to happen?
So I think there's two things. So firstly, on the PSB ecology, I think there was already we were in an Ofcom PSB review year, and there was already a concern that Ofcom were going to use the PSB review, helped to no small degree by the considerable lobbying efforts of the incumbents to try to preserve the current PSB ecology.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not clear to me that that's the right question to be asking. We have 4 PSBs because in 1997, when Channel 5 started, spectrum was scarce, so people wanted to get something in return. It wasn't clear that that was the right answer then. It's definitely not clear that 4 PSBs is the right answer now. And it certainly won't, if it was the right answer in 97, it almost by definition can't be the right answer for 2030. And that what we should be looking at is what ecology we need in 2030. If it's 4 PSBs, well, that is incredibly fortunate. But it might be 2, or it might be 6, or it might be we just need to think about what PSB means and what is the best structure to deliver that over the next decade. So I think that PSB review needs to be much more fundamental rather than what can we do to keep ITV going for 2 years.
So what the things we have to think about, I think, and help me out here, Claire, or Lindsay, or Damien, are if we think about a fundamentally rethinking of how many PSBs we need, what they need to be doing, what are the risks or the potential risks for plurality? What are the potential risks for competition? Are these the big ones?
I mean, can I just make a point though? I mean, let us not condemn Channel 4 too quickly, because after all, although it's absolutely right, they have extraordinary advertising, they may have a decline of 300 million this year, and then maybe 200 million this year. But they do have real assets, including their office, and they do have a lot of flexibility in their budgeting. They can cut channels. So, I just do not argue Channel 4 has not got levers. It has many, many levers to pull. It is pulling them. It has pulled them faster, dare I say, than ITV. And of course, it can do more work. I'm with Sean if the advertising market is resized, then I'm afraid we have to rethink how many public service broadcasters can be supported by TV advertising. But it certainly means that the argument made by number 10 that the BBC should be supported by TV advertising or by subscription, it makes it a nonsense argument anyway. So thank God that one's over. But what I'm saying is that consolidation may happen much more quickly than the law if we have a further really massive shock in 2021, Channel 4 may really be at risk. But for now, I do not think the Channel 4's overall situation is treacherous in the way that it would be in 2021 when it's run through its reserves and it has already sold its building.
So either Lindsay or Damien, do you want to come in on this? You know, what should we do about Channel 4? Are they more nimble? I think they are in some ways because they're not a publicly listed company. They don't have shareholders breathing down their neck.
Absolutely, they can be more nimble from that point of view, but also it's that what makes them nimble makes them fragile at the same time. I think Sean's point is a profound one, and it plays into my thought that we need a whole new legislative framework, just as the sort of, which is what a root and branch review would end up at. And I suppose what we should all go away and look at is the debates about the mobile phone market and how many mobile phone suppliers do you want in this country, because you can get to a point where there are too few, that two isn't enough to have proper competition, because you need to guard against oligopoly as well as monopoly and all those kinds of things. And when you add into the public service broadcasting debate the idea that we're talking about culture here and not just pure economic competition, in the end, the phone signal comes. It doesn't matter, frankly, to the British culture whether you're on Vodafone or O2. It does matter whether you've got more than one news supplier that is obeying the rules and all of that. So, and indeed, in terms of entertainment programs as well, they've got to reflect the British culture. So I think that is the root of where the thinking should be, of how many of the existing PSPs, or how many PSPs do we need, and how do we then fit that into, in as comfortable way as possible, the structure that we've all got used to over the last quarter of a century. And it may well be not the same number, but as Sean says, it may be that you apply sort of economics and cultural theory to it, and you think, actually, we've got too few, not too many.
It's interesting because, I think we've all said that we need to fundamentally rethink the whole structure of it. I mean, you said that. I think everyone's sort of saying, it's not like it was when we last looked at broadcasting. Lindsay, when you look at this going forward, I mean, how should we be rethinking the scope of, what we're thinking about, what Ofcom's thinking about, what the DCMS is thinking about, what the government's thinking about? Is there some rethinking that needs to be done?
Well, I think the key thing for me is when a lot of the, the last Broadcasting Act was passed, we were looking at the TV companies, the broadcasters in relation to each other. Now, it feels like it's the sort of UK broadcasting effort versus much more significant competitors who are huge, global, highly profitable tech platforms. So, actually, I think the broadcasters have got a lot more in common than they have otherwise. And actually, we can't really do that without looking at the significant impact that some of those tech platforms have on the business of the UK broadcasters.
And also, if I could just lob in here, I mean, if you look at Sky News, for example, that's not a PSB, not considered a PSB, and yet they produce wonderful, good news.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is the definition?
Sorry, Kate, it is a public service broadcaster, and it is held to the highest standards. I'm sorry. Sky News is a public service broadcaster news operation. It is. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Just,
all right. So in other words, it's not just the four that we usually think about, Claire, I guess, is the.
No, it's that
S4C as well.
S4C.
That specific operation is part of public service broadcasting, as indeed is Sky and Viacom and all the other services that are available. They're just on a sort of slightly different flavor. Anyway.
So when you're talking, Claire, just because we're in the last sum up. So if anybody has anything else to say, this is your moment to say it. So Claire, can I start with you? Do we need to be thinking more outside of the box and new broadcasting business models? What was, if you had?
No, I think that Ofcom's decision to put off the PSB review was very wise. You do not look at the future when you're in the eye of the storm and when the crisis is taking you hither and thither. You look at it when you can start to see the swoosh bit, to Damien Green's point or Lindsay's point. When there is a swoosh point, that is when you try to figure out what there's going to be. And that is the only way to look at it. No forecast and no MP. And also above all, this government, which is actually responsible for all of this mess, how can they say where we're going to be? Let us just let the sector try to survive until the middle of next year. And then we have the commercial licenses go off. By then we'll have had the 22, 27 settlement from the BBC, a new DG, a new chair. These are the things that need to work through. Imaginative thinking, that is for a time when we have space for imagination. Yeah. We have now only time for survival. That is all that matters. And you won't find a regulator or someone responsible or a chief executive who thinks any different. Survival is not fun.
Survival's not fun, yes. Any last thoughts from Sean or Lindsay or Damien?
Can I have one last mic thought? I mean, first of all, to say the British government is responsible for a pandemic that started in China is a bit much, Claire. But we've been talking very macro for the last 10 minutes. I want to go very micro, and I've stolen this from somebody who asked one of the Q&As, which was a brilliant point, which is that we could get a lot of production going again if we changed from 2 meter distancing to 1 meter distancing, which a lot of other countries, including South Korea, have done very successfully. I think that would be the single best thing to make sure that the swoosh was at a higher angle rather than the lower one.
Hard to do romantic scenes, but I take your point, yeah.
Strictly might be difficult in the autumn, but quite a lot of other ones you could do.
Yeah, yeah. Lindsay, do you have something final?
Yeah, just to continue on my theme, which is please don't hold the UK broadcasters to a higher account than their significant competitors, and please maintain the scrutiny on the tech platforms, and because a level playing field particularly in the advertising environment would be much appreciated.
Yeah. Sean?
No, I'm off to get back to Disney Plus.
You're watching The Mandalorian, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much to all of you. I want to thank the audience for hanging in here. I hope this was useful. I also want to thank our producers, Jonathan Simon, Nigel Warner, and Keith Underwood, and also Jamie O'Neill from the RTS. He's done a lion's share of the work here on the text, so thank you very much, Jamie. I'd also like to thank our panel. Thank you, Lindsay Clay, Sean McGuire, Damien Green, and Claire Enders. We have 2 upcoming events that the RTS is doing in the first week of June. One, we just done the economic impact of COVID. The one in the first week of June is called the viewing impact of COVID. And we're also doing a slightly more lighthearted one about why we love property shows. And also, Damien, maybe about how we do property shows with social distancing in the future. That's all that I have to say to everyone. Thank you for joining us, audience. I'm Kate Bulkley. Thank you for joining the RTS this afternoon. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.